And right now, everybody got that message, didn't they?
Yeah, popped up on my screen there.
Sorry.
So the edge mask is the opposite, if you will, of an area mask. It would highlight just the sharp edges in an image. So if you were to look at this image you see here, the area mask might highlight this area here and a blurry version of this. The edge mask will be a bunch of fine lines that just highlight the edges. It can be very useful when sharpening because you can sharpen just the edges in an image that way. The feature mask is, I hesitate to call it a mask tool. It's a way of separating the stars and the background in an image. And we'll take a look at that. I don't have a slide on it. It is one of the most powerful features in the software. The ability to quickly take the stars out of an image, do something, and then put them back in. A high pass filter is really not a mask either. It can be used for sharpening. It can make a mask and it would give you, it's a sort of equivalent to edges, but with a little more control. And a threshold is exactly what it says. It allows you to threshold an image so that all parts of the mask are either white or black. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit here. So the first one that was on that list is a Luminance Mask, and it's got several uses. It can be used when stretching an image. You tend to use it to prevent stretching the background of an image and keeping the noise under control. You can use it when sharpening. And you can use it for a technique that I'll show you tonight called layered masked stretching. It's not anything that is particular to astrophotography. It can be used in daytime images as well to make an HDR image. But it allows you to, using the mask, combine a dim image and a bright image to get the best of both. You tend to blur the mask for LMS processing, and you keep the mask sharp for most stretching and sharpening. When you do noise reduction, we use an inverted version of the Luminance Mask, and then sometimes it's quite useful to blur it just a little bit. So that's, as I said, an inverted Luminance Mask. When you make this mask, you tend to stretch it and blur it a bit so that you can control just how much noise reduction is applied to different areas in the image, to the bright areas and the dark areas, and basically apply most of the noise reduction to the dark areas. That way you don't lose the detail in the image you're working with. Now, one thing I should mention, Images Plus basically allows you to do what gets referred to as localized processing, meaning you're really doing processing on part of an image. It uses masks to control that, as well as brightness in the image. A lot of the controls actually have a minimum, maximum, and feathering slider built into the control, so that you can only apply the adjustment to, for instance, a given brightness level. Other packages, like PixInsight as an example, they don't support localized imaging very well. They make it very difficult to do. It's not a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an oversight in the package. The designers took a different approach to image processing, where most of the work that you do on the image as a whole. So they made masks a little more difficult to generate. You still can use them, however. So one of the masks we looked at, and again, we'll get into more detail here in a little bit how to do this, but is a custom Luminance mask. Now, for those that are out there that are used to Photoshop, this is the equivalent of selecting a given brightness in Photoshop. What you can do, you can, by using the sliders in the mask, select various brightness levels. You can put a feather on the selection, and you can use it, for instance, to make a mask of an image where all the stars are dark. You can actually take the stars out of the mask. Give you an idea, so my mouse will work here. Here is a mask made from one of my Horsehead Nebula shots, and you can see the parameters here in the custom Luminance Mask. You can select which channel you want to use. In this case, I'm using all three. I'm using Luminance. And by taking the minimum luminance and sliding it toward white, this area down here in the mask, in the mask down here, becomes dark. It becomes black. By sliding the maximum luminance slider down toward black, I start to take out the stars in the image. So for instance, I could use this to brighten up just the nebula and not really brighten up the cores of these stars, as an example. You have feathering controls over both, so you can blend it together a bit. And finally, you have something called the smooth radius, which applies a blur to the mask. Once you get it done, if you want, you can invert the mask. My mouse has disappeared. Just a quick question. Is my mouse visible on the...
Yes.
Perfect. So you can invert the mask. As soon as I stop moving my mouse, when the arrow disappears, when I move it again, it's over on the right-hand side of my screen, which is why I'm somewhat confused here every now and then. But this invert mask allows you to do just that. You can flip the color scheme around so that this would be black and this would be white. The selective color mask works very similar to the custom Luminance mask. The difference is you have one more thing to select, which is the color that you want to use. So for instance, I could select it so that I only make a mask out of the purple areas of an image, and then I can control what brightnesses get included in the mask. It can be very, very useful when you want to boost a specific color in the image. So one of the things we'll take a look at in a little bit, Bob was kind enough to donate his M1 image that I went through the processing with him the other night. And one of the things you can do with this color luminance mask is to boost the red in the tendrils of M1 simply by selecting red. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. This gives you an idea. This just so happens to be Bob's image here. And you can see what I've done. I actually, you select this checkbox, you click on the image to select the color you want, and it will automatically select it up here. You can then vary both the color and the amount of feathering by moving these sliders. After that, the controls are identical to the custom Luminance mask, with one exception. There's a mask level slider. It was a slider that Mike added on the last version to this dialogue. And what it does is it makes the mask brighter or dimmer. He was going to add it to all of the mask dialogues, but never got around to it before he decided he was going to move on to other things. The last thing we're going to take a quick look at here is thresholding. And basically, it uses a view of the histogram of the image, and there's a slider at its bottom. And basically, anything above the slider becomes white, and anything below the slider becomes black. It can be very useful for making a mask where brightness variation is not required. So for instance, if you wanted to take the core of a galaxy, for example, which is the brightest part of the galaxy, and make it white and everything else black so that you can just process the galactic core. It's a good tool for doing that sort of thing. This is the dialogue that brings it up, and you can see the slider that I was talking about here. This button moves it all the way to here. This button all the way to this end. These two buttons move it a little bit in either direction. I've never used those. I just grab the slider and move it directly, as do most people. And you can see the effect by putting the slider here. Anything dimmer than this slider position becomes black in the image. Anything brighter than this slider position becomes white. So you can see I now have a mask that includes all of the nebula. It also includes all of the stars, which I could then paint out if I wanted. So that's just a very quick overview of the masks themselves. I think that was the last slide in the presentation. So bear with me a minute. If this works the way it, is supposed to, I'm going to share my screen again, but I'm going to share it with Images Plus. So bear with me. Okay, there we are. Somewhere here it is, Images Plus. So let me know when everyone can see the Images Plus software display there.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so as I said, oh, by the way, you'll notice that the special functions menu is not available. You have to actually open an image before that menu becomes available for those that are curious. So if we go and open an image, the one I'm going to grab first off is a horsehead image. So here is an image of the horsehead. I'm going to, just to speed things up a bit, I'm going to bin it by 2. That'll just make the image a little smaller and speed the processing up for what we're doing here. There we go. So here is the image. And one of the things we want to do with an image early on, of course, is stretch it. So in this case, I'll just apply an arcsine stretch. The reason, by the way, I keep moving these dialogues over here, the video of everybody is in the corner here. And there we go. And it just covers up the dialogue. There we go. So if we stretch this image, and I'll just use an arcsine H stretch just to bring the horse head out a bit. Brighter. And we'll fix up the red. And then darken the background a bit. Okay, so now we have the beginnings of a horsehead nebula image. There we are. I'm just going to fix the color up a bit here. Bear with me. I hate green stars. And my camera has a definite green bias. This looks like a good candidate. There we go. And then we'll just neutralize the background a bit right here. Okay, so now we have a reasonable start on the horsehead. Just shrink it down a bit so you can see the whole image there. So if you take a look at this image, very first thing you'll notice is the contrast is a little low. And the background is, if I zoom in a little bit noisy. Now, hopefully that is showing up in zoom. Sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just going to further stretch the background a bit just so that the noise becomes a little bit more visible. Oops. Hopefully that will now make it. Okay, can you see the noise, the fine grained noise in the background in this area?
I'd call it very subtle.
It is. It's a long enough exposure that the noise is actually fairly low, but you should be able to see it there. And if we apply a stretch to the image, then it's going to accentuate that noise a bit. So for instance, if we do a curve adjustment here, and we do a little more, and then I turn the background down a bit, now you should be able to see that noise a little more.
That's good, but I can do a lot better than that.
I'm sure. At stretching the image or bringing out noise?
No, having noise.
Yes to both.
Now, what I'm going to do here, though, so we've stretched this image. You can see that the image has gotten a little bit brighter, but we brought the noise up. Ideally, what you'd like to be able to do is stretch an image without bringing the noise up as much. So Luminance Mask to the rescue. We'll make a Luminance Mask of the stretched image. We can then noise reduce the Luminance Mask just a little bit. And there's lots of noise reduction tools in Images Plus to do that. And that's sort of a topic of another session. But at any rate, there we have a slightly noise reduced version of that, maybe a little too noise reduced. But what we're going to do now, you'll notice that this is now a mask, and you know that because it says gray. That means it's a monochrome image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch the mask just a little bit, and all I'm going to do is use levels. It's a very simple adjustment to darken the background. The reason for darkening the background is I want to apply the stretch, but I only want to apply it to this area, not to the background, so that the noise doesn't come up. And we will probably just pull the midtones up a little bit here. A little bit more. There we go. So now I'm going to now save that mask. You can click Special Functions, Mask, Save As, or you can click this particular disk drive icon, and that will save the mask. And generally, I call my masks something that makes sense to me, and I usually start it with the word mask. Doesn't matter what you name it, you can take the default. Only problem with taking the default is when you want to go back and use it, you'll have 6 or 7 masks there, and you got to go figure out which is which. So I'm just going to call this Mask Brighten for now. It will ask you what format you want to store the file in. It does this for any file that you store. I generally store it as a 16-bit lossless compressed image. The format is entirely up to you. Obviously, if you save it as an 8-bit file, it will cause you some grief because it will posterize. So now we've saved that mask. Now what we want to do is, if we go back to this curve adjustment here, I'd like to apply it to the curve adjustment. So you click the history dialog as we looked at before. You click the mask button, and now it brings up the mask surface window. You're not going to use a control point mask. You're going to use a mono image. And I could load it by clicking load, but I can also right click in the white area here and select paste mask. That will paste the last mask that I saved. And now if we take a look at the image, I'm going to take the history dialog and I'm going to slide it down this way. So you can see the image got slightly darker. Now we're going to make it brighter. As you can see, I put the curve adjustment back in. But let's take a look at the dark area of the image in here. If you take a look at that dark area, it didn't bring the noise up a whole lot. The reason is the mask is only allowing the curve to be applied to the bright areas of the mask. So if I take the mask off, pay attention to this area. I'll take the mask off and see how the noise came up in here. Now the image did get brighter because the mask is not white anywhere, so it limits the amount of the brightening that happens, but it applies most of it to the Horsehead Nebula itself and the stars. And you can just use multiple curves with the same mask to get the brightness that you want, all the time limiting the noise in the darker areas of the image. I tend, after my sort of first stretch that we just looked at, the ArcSine H stretch, almost all other stretches that I do to an image involve a mask. It keeps the noise out of the background, and it does a really good job of it, to the point where I can take this now and actually stretch it a substantial amount more. You can see the nebula is now starting to get nice and bright. And if I stretch it even more, there will of course be a limit. But even with what is a ridiculous amount of curve adjustment, the background is not too bad. As you can see in here, it looks much better than it did if you did not have the mask on. So if we take the mask off, look at the noise that came up in this area. And it's simply because this area gets a large stretch applied to it, and that brings the noise out. Whereas if I use a mask, I keep this area under control while brightening up the areas of the image that I'm actually interested in. Everybody follow that? Not hearing anyone say no, so I will continue.
So far, so good.
Okay, so that's a simple luminance mask. Now, the one problem with a simple luminance mask is it will allow stars to bloat a little bit. And we'll get into how you can prevent that in a little bit more here. The other thing I mentioned early on is that most of the controls in Images Plus have a couple of sliders that let you limit the brightness range over which the adjustment is applied. The curves dialog is no different. You notice there's a black slider, which I've slid up to here, and there's a white slider. If I did not want to apply as much stretch to the stars, I could simply take that down, and you can see, notice the star here. Watch, I'll slide it all the way up, and you watch Alnitak. See a bloat because of the extreme stretch I'm applying. Okay, if I dial this down a bit, most of the bloat goes away. Again, it's because I'm not applying the stretch to that brightness level. And those controls, you can think of those as a somewhat simplistic luminance mask. I can limit how much of the stretch is applied to the dark areas and the light areas just with any control. That's built in most Images Plus functions. But the mask allows you to adjust over the whole surface of the image. So if we take a look now, if I can shrink this down one more here. So here's our image. Here is our image before now let me make this go away. Here is our image before I applied the stretch. You can see it's quite a bit dimmer, but look at the background. It doesn't get a whole lot noisier, even though I've stretched everything, because the mask is limiting the effect to only the brighter areas of the image. Okay, so that's a simple luminance mask. Now, the next thing we're going to take a look at, and what I'm going to do to show this, just so it becomes very obvious, I'm going to take the mask off that adjustment. Now, with the mask off that adjustment, and if we zoom right in, now you should be able to see the noise in this area. It should almost be as bad as what Jerry can generate. No comment? So I'm assuming, can people see the noise in there? I'm hoping that translates across Zoom fairly well.
Yeah, there's noise there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone can see that, good. You'll notice that when you get to the brighter areas of the image, there's very little noise. And that's typical of the way noise works. It's really in the shadows, if you will. Now, when I say there's very little noise here, that's a little bit inaccurate. There's actually almost roughly the same amount of noise everywhere in the image. But your eye doesn't see noise directly. It's a function of signal to noise ratio. If that ratio approaches 42 to 48, then you don't notice the noise. Anything higher than about 48, and people don't normally notice any noise at all. It's one of the reasons I tell people not to expose their images for longer than the present age of the universe, because once you pass a signal to noise ratio of about 40, it really depends on the person, but somewhere between 42 and 46 dB, you don't see the noise anymore. So here, there's very little signal. It's a black area of the sky, and thus you see the noise because the signal to noise ratio here is quite low. Over in the bright red area here, the signal to noise ratio is high, and as a result, although the noise is just as bad as over here, you don't see it. So we can take advantage of that. And the way we can take advantage of that is it would be, oh, excuse me, I had the hiccups here. It would be nice to be able to reduce the noise in this image, but only reduce it in the dark areas. And furthermore, feather the adjustment. So if you look here, you'll notice that the noise is bad here, and then it gets better and better and better as the image gets lighter. It would be nice to sort of have most of the noise adjustment where it's black, and then smoothly fade it to no noise adjustment where it's bright. We can do that with that same luminance mask, but we're going to invert it. We're going to make it white in this area and black in this area. So for instance, if I just display that mask and I invert it, now you get the idea. It's dark now where the image is bright, and it's white where the image is dark. And we can actually accentuate that a little bit more with another levels adjustment. And what I'll do is I'll slide the black point up a bit just to make the blacks a little blacker. We can make the whites a little bit whiter by sliding the white point down. So that's not too bad there. So now I'm going to save that again, but this time I'm going to change the name to be NR for noise reduction. And we'll save that. Now, I'm going to take a noise reduction filter. And again, as I said, there are several. In particular, I'm going to use a frequency-based low-pass filter. It's similar to a Gaussian filter, and I'm using a frequency-based filter simply because it executes much faster. And I'm going to blur it enough so that this noise here goes away. So now you should be able to see that the noise in this area is pretty much gone. But you can see what the blurring filter did to the stars, not to mention the horse head itself. If we go over here and take a look, it's all pretty blurry now compared to before the filter was applied. So if I take the filter off, see a nice sharp horse head with the filter. Look at what happens, right? I've taken the noise out, but I've blurred the image to the point where I don't like it anymore. And the way we're going to solve that is we're going to apply that inverted luminance mask that I then stretched a little bit to this adjustment. So let's take a look. We'll go over back to this area up here. And we'll apply the mask again. So here's the mask. It's another mono image. Again, I could click load and look it up from the file open dialog, or I can just click paste mask and paste in the last mask that I used, or that I saved rather. Now, take a look at this area. It's still nice and quiet, but look at the stars all of a sudden. So I'm going to turn the mask off. Notice the stars blur out. When I put the mask back on, all of a sudden the stars are sharp again. Okay, because the stars are light, and in the inverted mask, they're black. So the adjustment is not applied where the mask is black. Furthermore, go take a look now at the horse head itself. And I probably could have made the mask a little darker in this area, but look at the effect without the mask. The horse head is blurred. Look at it with the mask. You get a lot of the detail back. Can everybody see the difference with zoom compression there?
Yeah.
Okay. And again, I can make the mask a little darker to make that even sharper. So for instance, if I just display the mask, and we'll make this mask a little bit darker still using a curves adjustment. That's not too bad, maybe a little more. There we go. It's a trade-off of how dark I make this, but I still want to keep this area light. So that's the trade-off. If I make it too dark, I'll lose some noise reduction in this area. So at any rate, we're saving this image. And then if I close that, and go back to here. Here's my now darker mask. It automatically updates in here, by the way. I just click apply. And there, the horse head just got a little sharper. That's probably difficult to see in zoom because of zoom compression. But take the mask off, you see most of this area gets blurry. Put the mask back on, and now this area is all sharp again, but the noise is well controlled. If we turn off the adjustment, again, I'm about to point at my screen, like that's going to do any good, right? In this area, take a look at what happens sort of all the way up into the horse head if I remove the blur that I just applied to reduce the noise. See the noise that's there? Does that translate across Zoom okay? But if I now put that blur back on with the mask, you can see the result. Still a reasonably sharp image with lots of detail, but all of the dark areas are now nice and quiet. And I can play around a bit with the brightness or darkness of the mask, as well as the amount of noise reduction that I actually apply. So for instance, I can apply a little less noise reduction. That'll take a second to crunch. That gives me a slightly sharper image. There's a little tiny bit of noise showing up here, but not much. So I could probably, slide that up a little bit more. And once it's finished, that's probably about as far as I'd want to go. I'm getting a little tiny bit of noise in there now. And again, if I go look here, I've got lots of detail in the nebula, but all around the dark areas is nice and quiet. And that's a function of using a mask on that adjustment. So you can see that masks are very useful in terms of controlling where you want to apply things like noise reduction. I'm going to show you a different tool for reducing noise. I'm going to take that one off. So now you should be able to see the noisier image. And we're going to apply it, but we're going to apply it without a mask. So we come here. This is a detailed preserving smooth. It's not perfect. It will lose some detail, but it does a reasonable job. And I need to blur it enough to take, okay, so that took the noise out. You can see the stars are a little so-so. But you'll notice there are two sliders here, min and max apply. And I can, if I check this box, I can click in the image to select the brightness level, or I can just slide this along and I can get most of my stars back fairly sharp by simply sliding that along a bit. Now you can see I've got reasonable noise reduction, but I have my stars reasonably sharp. The problem is you get a little ringing around the stars. You notice there's a little sort of halo showing up around them. Hopefully that translates across in Zoom, which is why I like to use a mask as opposed to these controls. The mask does a much, much better job. So if you take a look, if we look at the history slider here, and we remove this function, wait for it to do its thing, and then reapply the frequency filter with the mask, as I've just done, no more ringing around the stars, and I still get all the noise control in the dark areas. I even get these faint little stars here because the mask was dark enough to preserve those. So that gives you an idea of the uses that you can use two types of masks for. One is a simple luminance mask, and the other one is just an inverted luminance mask. It's the same luminance mask, except I invert it to do an operation on the dark areas of the image as opposed to the light areas. And the nice part about Images Plus is it really encourages localized processing. Now, what I mean by that is I only want to process on a very specific area. So if I wanted to, suppose I did not want any noise reduction at all to be applied along the edges here of the horse head so that I had no blurring there, keeping that as sharp as I can get it. You can actually do that in Images Plus with the paint tools. You take the mask. The paint tools are here. They're called Local, Smooth, Sharpen, Clone, all sorts of stuff. It brings up this dialog. We're going to paint on the image with this intensity, 0. This is the size of my brush. I'm actually going to make the brush a little bit bigger, but before I do, I have to zoom in on the image so I can see what I'm doing. So again, we'll go to the horse head itself. And I want to make the area around the horse head darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take probably about 15. Yeah, that'll work. And now what we'll do is we'll just paint this area. And I'm not painting on the image here. I'm painting on the mask. Okay, so just that top area. You can see now I've made it black. And where it's black, there will be absolutely no adjustment. So we're going to save that. Now I'm going to apply that mask. You can see it's a little hard to see here, but there is a dark ring around there. Now I'm going to apply it. And I want you to watch this area right around here. Everybody see that it got a little bit sharper? Now I've got great.
Can you repeat that again?
Could you expand the size of the horse head, please?
That's at 100% right now. I can make it bigger.
Sorry, just enough so it's easier to see the difference. There, that's better.
Okay, now if you take a look, it's nice and sharp here now, all along that edge, and the noise is well controlled. The one thing that, sorry,
do that? Can you?
Unfortunately, not easily, because I've saved that mask and closed it. I probably shouldn't have closed it, and then I could have redone it. One sec. Display mask. Now I can't undo it, but I can probably, no, I can't. Unfortunately, I can't, Jerry, because I closed the mask.
Okay.
I don't know if you folks can see this, but there's an edge. Wait till I make that even smaller here. One sec. Open operators, local. There's an edge right here where there's a flat red area, and it's because on the mask, if I zoom in on the mask, there's an abrupt change. You can see that sharp edge right there. So what happens is there's no blurring in this area, and then it immediately transitions to some blurring, and it leaves sort of a ridge in the image. The way to get rid of that is, again, using the paint tools, is simply to blur that edge a bit. And you can do that with the blur tool and then just sort of blend it in a little bit. And same on this edge down here. You want to blur that ever so slightly. There we go. So now it'll blend in a little better. There, now it's sort of smoothed it right out. You have a nice sharp edge on the horse head. The noise is well controlled. If we take the mask off, watch how everything gets blurred in this area. Then we'll put the mask back on. You see the difference there?
Yeah.
Okay, and the nice part with Images Plus is you do have a set of paint tools, and feel free to paint on a mask anytime. Some people sort of really don't like doing that. They feel they're modifying the data. The goal is to make a pretty picture. right? So my take on it is, who cares if you're modifying data? You're modifying data as soon as you put a nonlinear stretch on an image. If you take a galaxy image and you put a nonlinear curve on it so that the arms come out almost as bright as the core, a galaxy doesn't look that way. You've modified the data. It really doesn't matter if you go in and apply a mask to the adjustment. It's in a lot of cases an easier way to get some of the effects that you can get, as long as you don't keep this "I mustn't modify the data" attitude, because in truth, any adjustment you do modifies the data. If you are doing scientific imaging, that is a different matter. If you're making a pretty picture, feel free to do whatever you need to do to get the image you want. You know, including if you don't like red, change it. That's easy to do. And I'll give you an idea of just how easy that is to do using a mask. Funny thing. Let's say now, okay, close this mask. So now we have our horsehead image, and I probably still have quite, yeah, I haven't applied the noise reduction here. One sec. Bring that up. And just zoom in here so I can see it. Oh, it's applied, just a little, not as much as I had before. So let me just put that back in. That should blur that out a bit. There we are. Okay. So now we have our horsehead image. And you can see I've got reasonable detail and reasonable noise control. So now the next thing we'll do to this image, it's a little low in contrast, as I think everyone can look at it and see there. So I'm just going to take a levels adjustment and just dial up the contrast a little bit. There we go. That will make things a little easier to see here as we go along. So here's our horsehead image. And the next thing, we might want to do something only to the red parts of this image. So for instance, suppose we wanted to change the shade of red for whatever reason. One way to do that, you could carefully feather in some of the color adjustment tools, and it's a real pain to do that, but you can do it if anyone has tried to do that in Photoshop, for example. The other way to do it is one of those special mask tools that I mentioned, which is the Selective Color Luminance Mask. And I'm showing this one as opposed to the custom Luminance Mask simply because it works exactly the same way, except it also allows me to select color. So we'll sort of cover off two at once here. So the first thing I want to do, I only want to adjust the red parts of the image. So I click Select Hue from Image. I could select a color from the drop-down list here, but I am only going to adjust, let's say, the red areas of this image. So I click on a red area, and you can see what happens. Everything else in the image pretty much disappeared, except where the red is bright. Let's shrink that down a little. Obviously, there's some dots left from the stars because some of the stars have red in them. And what I really want to do is I want to take this area and I'm going to use it as a mask for another adjustment. Now, everyone see these little adjustment handles here. The gray ones are feather. So if I take this and pull it down to here, it will feather the adjustment in color from here to here. Likewise, if I pull this up, if I slide this slider down, it sets the hard limit of where everything is selected. So I could go down there and I'll get a little more in there. The next thing I may want to do, I may not want these dim areas up here to be adjusted. So I can take this minimum slider and slide it up until those dim areas disappear. And if I just keep going, eventually they will disappear. Oop, too much. Okay, so what you do, you get it close and then you fine tune it with the feathering slider here. So there, that's looking pretty good there. Okay. So now I have mostly just the red areas of the image that I'm going to adjust, but I have a couple of really bright dots, which are the stars, and we can just simply slide the max down to make those go away. You see this, you saw the one here just disappear. If you watch there, I'll slide the slider back, the star comes back, I slide it down, the star goes away. I can only take out so many stars this way because what will happen is eventually I'll get down to this brightness level and it'll start removing the nebula. So you got to be a little careful, but you get the idea. So we'll do that. Finally, there are two other adjustments here. The mask level, all that does is make the mask brighter or dimmer. You get the idea. And the other adjustment, which can be, I'm just trying to get rid of that saturated area there. There we go. So I get my data back in here. The other slider here allows me to blur the mask a little bit. So I can sort of slide that up a bit and it'll take some of the noise out of the mask. So now we have a mask that highlights just the red areas. I'll put enough blur in it to blend it in all the way around, which I've pretty much done there now. And we'll store that mask. Oop, better show you one other thing here. You will notice that there is no word gray up here telling me it's a mask. This is an oversight on the part of Mike Unsole when he wrote this. It was something he was going to fix. I had reported it to him in beta testing. The color Luminance Mask tool, the selective color mask tool, doesn't make a mask. It makes a gray image, but it's still an RGB gray image. You have to then make a mask out of it by saying, give me a Luminance Mask. Now you see the word gray there. So I can save that mask. And we'll just call it mask red. Now I'm going to undo all of that work on the mask so I get my image back. There we are, got my image back, and I've already saved the mask. So what we want to do now is we want to go to work on the red and we're going to change it. And I'm going to do something ridiculous that I would never do to an image, but it will give you an idea. I'm going to turn the green, I'll make it yellow. I'll turn the yellow up. It didn't do enough. Let's turn blue up. There we go. Now I'm going to apply a mask that we just made to that color adjustment. And now you can see you've got a purple nebula and you haven't affected anything out here. Everyone see that? Hopefully that's not too subtle to see over Zoom. Reasonably visible?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, you can get ridiculous, to say the least. I can make it yellow. Now you can really see it. Not that you would ever make it that color. But in a lot of cases, you get an image that is that color. I think a lot of people will find that they have done some processing and ended up with reds that look that kind of weird color. This is how you get rid of them in Images Plus. You simply dial the yellow out with a mask, and then you get the red that you want. Okay, and it doesn't affect any of the stars or anything else because they were not selected by the mask. And if you don't like that color red, for example, you may want it to be, let's say, a little bit pinker. Let me just reset this one sec. It's a pet peeve of mine. Nebulae should not be pink. HA light is not pink, but most people tend to make them a little pink because it looks kind of nice. And again, no problem with that. It's easy to do. For example, there's a lot of different tools in here to allow it. This particular one is quite nice. For instance, I'm going to select just the red and I can change the hue. I can change the saturation. I can also change its brightness, but I'm going to do it with this same mask. So for example, we'll take it and shift reds a little bit to pink. See, I've made it a little pinker there, but we're going to put the mask on so I don't affect everything. So there's my slightly pink nebula. And then I want to brighten just the areas up a bit. Now you can see that it shifted the nebula more toward pink as opposed to the dark red that it was. Is that visible coming across Zoom? If I take that adjustment off, everyone can see it's sort of an orangey red. And then if I put the adjustment back on, having used a mask to limit it just to the red in the image, now it looks a little pinker. Everybody see that? And you can do that, for instance, if we zoom in now and we go down to this area, note this color. You'll notice it didn't change because the mask is dark in that area. It's only applying it to the red because that's what I selected with the color Luminance Mask tool. Oops, one too many there. One sec. So you can see now you have that nice pink color that everyone seems to like in nebulae. And you can get ridiculous with it. I can shift it far enough that it doesn't look right at all. You can see now it's sort of a mauve color or a purple color. But again, although I'll shift it right to blue. Although it doesn't look the right color, you'll notice that there's not an abrupt transition to any of the other colors because the mask is blurred a bit and it blends it all together quite nicely. I'll just go back to here. And, we can turn the saturation up. Probably, that kind of looks ugly, doesn't it? Maybe want to turn the saturation down a bit. There we go. And then I can turn the brightness up just a little bit more. And there we're getting a reasonable Horsehead Nebula image. We've only done 3 adjustments. We've brightened it. We have noise reduced it. And now we've just adjusted the color a little bit. Each adjustment using a mask to really tailor where that change is applied in the image. There's a bunch of mask tools here that I haven't looked at because they're just versions of the Luminance Mask. I can make a mask of just the red channel. I can make a mask of the green channel or the blue channel, and you can see the difference. Here's the red channel. You can see that the nebulae is quite bright in here. Here's the blue mask, blue channel. The nebula is significantly darker because there's very little blue in that nebula. It's mostly red. So you can adjust, individual color channels that way if you want. There are easier ways to do that, but it just gives you an idea of the things you can do. But these first set of masks, all the way down to the custom Luminance Mask, they're all designed to make effectively Luminance masks of one form or another. The selective color Luminance Mask makes a mask that is based both on brightness and color. Negative just negates the mask. That's somewhat obvious. Oh, hiccups again. If we take a look, there's another mask tool here called Area Mask. Now, what an area mask is just a Luminance mask that's had a big blur applied to it. And if you look, it even opens up the smoothing tool with a certain window applied to the tool. So it just makes a blurred copy of the mask. What it does is it removes all the detail. So there may be, for instance, an area of your image that you want to work on, and you can see what we've done here. We've blurred out all of the details, so I could perhaps change color in this area. I would not apply this mask to brighten the image, because if I blur a mask and apply it to a stretch, you will end up with a slightly blurred image as a result. Sometimes that's useful. You may want to do a little noise reduction and brighten things at the same time, but generally you don't do that. Generally, you only apply a very slight blur to a mask just to take the noise in the mask down when you're using it to stretch an image. If you are noise reducing an image, you tend to apply a bigger blur. So this would be a good way to generate an image for noise reduction, because you want to remove the noise in the mask for that. So the converse, if you will, or the opposite of an area mask is an edge mask. And if we take a look here, there is, there is an edge mask feature. And you can see what it's done in the setting that I'm using right now. The one that I use most often, by the way, is this particular mask. There are several other edge masks, but this one gives you control, so I tend to use this the most. You can see you have the outline of the horse head, the outline of the flame, and of course the edges around all of the stars. I can then make that mask bright. There we go. So now, for instance, I could use this when sharpening an image, and it would only apply the sharpen where the mask is bright. That allows me to control my sharpening so that I don't increase the noise in this area due to the sharpening. I only want to get the edges sharper. I can also adjust the width of the edge in the mask, so I can make the edges very small. You tend to get all this fine-grained noise. Or I can make the edges quite wide, as you can see here. And this would be a very good mask for sharpening that horse head, with one exception. There's a lot of stars in this, and you may or may not want to apply sharpening to the stars. And one of the things that, well, rather than say it, I can show it. Watch. If we take this, and we use it. By the way, you'll also notice there's a white area all around the mask. That's because that's the edge of the image, and it is an edge in the image, so it's selected. You can either paint that out with the paint tools and make it black, or just crop it out when you're done. We'll save that, and we'll say it's an edge mask. And what we're going to do, zoom in on the horse head here. And what we'll attempt to do here is we'll attempt to sharpen the horse head. So there's a variety of sharpening tools. This one works well and is fairly quick, so that's the reason I'm using it. But we'll sharpen the horse head. And so now, can everyone see the difference that happened there? The horse head got sharper, right? But the noise also came up. You notice the noise in this area of the image now? Everyone see that? If we apply that mask to that, we'll still get the sharp edges. So we still have a nice sharp edge, but the noise didn't come up because there's no edges up here and it didn't select it. There's still a little ringing around the stars, but it's greatly reduced. I'm going to take that sharpen and I'm going to make it a little ridiculous here so that you can really see the effect. I'll start to get artifacts around the stars here in a minute. Okay, now everyone see the sharpness? I actually got a little artifact around the edges here, but you should be able to see that. If we take the mask off, watch how yucky the rest of the image looks. Everybody see all the noise that it brought up here? Right, but by using edges, or by sharpening just the edges rather, most of the nebula looks good, and I've got a reasonably sharp Horsehead, it's a little over sharpened. I would never sharpen it that much, you know, more like, and turn this level down a bit. There we go. So now we have a reasonably sharp Horsehead, and the rest of the nebula looks pretty good. The reason it's mostly applied around the Horsehead, if we go back and look at the mask, you'll notice that the mask is quite bright around the Horsehead. It should also be quite bright here, and we didn't look over here to see what that looks like. Let's have a look in the image. That might be kind of yucky. No, it seems to have, it got a little noisy, but not too bad. So there's a sharpened Horsehead nebula. Everybody see the difference? And again,
Pretty good.
yeah, and again, you're controlling where you apply the sharpening by using that mask, just a simple edge mask. Sometimes you use a luminance mask when sharpening. It really depends on whether or not there are a lot of edges in the image. There aren't that many in here. So I might have actually wanted, for instance, to sharpen this area of the image up. So I might actually use a luminance mask as opposed to an edge mask. But if you can, use an edge mask because it gives a much better effect, as you can see. The big thing is you do not want to apply the sharpening to the dim areas of the image where you just bring the noise up. So the mask controls that. So there you are, 4 adjustments, and we're getting pretty close to the final Horsehead Nebula image. Each of those adjustments has had a mask applied to it. There is one tool that I'd like to show you here, and it's, oops, if I can shrink this down a little bit more, I want to get the whole image displayed. There we go. There. I just saw one chat message come up. Will an edge mask work well for Galaxies? It can. You do have to be a little careful using it on Galaxies because there tends to be an awful lot of edges. Sometimes a luminance mask may work better, and Galaxies are one of the times when that may happen. It really depends on the size of the galaxy. In Andromeda, as an example, where it's a very big galaxy, edge masks would work well. In M51, they might not work so well because they effectively have so many edges so squished together, it'll end up looking like a luminance mask anyway. But there's a way around some of that. We're just going to take a quick look at it here. And in order to get that look at it, I'm going to load up a different image here. This is an image that was graciously donated by Bob for me to demonstrate here tonight. Mr. Russell's M1 image. So if we look at this, here's M1. There were several issues that Bob had with this image, most notably some of this streaky noise. That's caused by, unfortunately, underexposure. Bob took a filtered image and really needed something like, what do we say, Bob, 15-minute subs, and you used 7? Sorry, you're muted there. I can't hear you.
Okay, yeah, I was using 7, and you suggested 15,
Yeah.
even as high as 20, depending on.
Yeah. So because of the underexposure, there's a lot of noise in the individual subs. And Bob, I'm assuming you dithered your subs?
Yes.
And the dithering resulted in some of this streaking due to the noise. Dithering removes pattern noise, but it can make streaky noise like this, where you've got, you know, a hot pixel or even a warm pixel can make this streaky noise when you're underexposed. As soon as you get your exposure up, that'll all go away. So we want to do the same sorts of things we did to the previous image. We want to reduce the noise. We want to brighten this up a bit. The problem is that there's a lot of stars in this image, and when I apply the noise reduction to it, it's going to blur the stars. Even when I make a luminance mask, some of the stars are quite dim. And because they are dim, they're going to be dim in the mask, which means that they will get blurred a bit. Some of the ways to avoid that come about from a tool that is really only now showing up in other packages. Mike Unsold added a tool called the feature mask. And what the feature mask does is, built in the software is a way to effectively remove the stars from the image. It's not perfect. On some images, it works better than StarNet. On other images, especially images where you have a dense star background, it doesn't work as well as StarNet. But you also don't have to remove all of the stars. You just want to get rid of the majority of them so that when I blur the image with a mask, these stars will not get blurred. So as an example, we will dial up the star radius a bit, and you can see most of, not all of, but most of the stars are now gone. And you can see it works really fast. It's not like StarNet where you have to go away and have coffee, maybe even supper before it's finished. It works in seconds. It did not remove some of the smaller stars. That's what this function is for. It takes a little longer, but again, it takes tens, 20s of seconds rather than an hour. And then, so all I did, this controls the radius of the star that I will remove. You have to be a little careful because as you slide it to the right, it will remove larger and larger stars. The problem is other things start to look like stars at those scales. So for instance, if we zoom right in here and we look at the nebula, you see these little red blobs in the nebula, those will begin to look like stars. If I slide this too far up, right now you can see it's starting to remove parts of the nebula that it thinks are stars. So you have to manually play around with that slider to remove everything that you want. You can see there's a star here. And let's say we want to make sure we get that star. So we'll slide it up a little bit more. Now I'm starting to remove a piece of the nebula here. I can slide the threshold up. This is a measure of how close it's got to be to a star before it will remove it. So if I slide it down this way, it makes it much easier. It will find things and think they're stars, as you can see here, even when they're not. So you want to slide that up so it does a good job of mostly removing just the stars. You don't have to be perfect, but you want to get close. There may be some areas of the image that get removed and you don't want them to be, or areas that it does not remove that you want removed. That's the reason for the special star area processing. You can click on something and remove it or not. It gives you a little bit of manual adjustment, as it were. So again, if we just sort of, that's not too bad. That's got most of the stars. I can then say, make the mask area size bigger. So you can see it's removed a little bit of that star. I can make that a little bit more. So if you watch, it enlarges it. Oops, sorry. What did I do there? I moved a wrong apply. I moved something wrong here. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry. There we go. So now you can see it's removed more area around the star. Generally speaking, the bigger you make this, the dimmer the leftover stars will be. Unfortunately, it will remove larger areas of the nebula, as you can see. So finally, you click on fill radius and generally start with the default. And here we have an image with very few stars. The reason I said start with the default, what that does is it's going to go, in this case, 3 pixels away from the edge and use whatever's around there to fill the star in. If I move this out here, it can result in dimmer stars, but oops, but you can get a ring around those stars. So you have to be a little careful. We'll just go with one more. And there we go. So here's our image. We have our nebula. There's very few stars, just some small ones, which we could remove with the remove small stars function. The only problem is the remove small stars function takes longer, so I won't bother.
Blair,
Yes.
did you want to mention the color mode? Because I got hung up on that one.
Oh, yes. I'll get to that. That's a good point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's next on the list, actually. But you can see now we have an image that has very few stars. I'm going the wrong way, sorry. There we go. Virtually all of the stars are gone from the image, right? And if we click undo, you can see that it's taken a good chunk of the stars out, and you can see how fast it operates there. So it's substantially faster than something like StarNet. Of course, now what you want to do is you want to bring the stars out to another image. So you just click split stars. Now I have an image of all of the stars, and I have an image of just the nebula and the background. Now I can process those. I can reduce the noise in the background. I can sharpen the nebula. I can add red. I can do whatever I want to just the nebula and not affect the stars at all. Then I can combine them later and put the stars back in. Images Plus makes that exceedingly easy to do, to the point where I would encourage anyone who's using Images Plus to simply do it as part of your normal processing. When you want to blur an image, take the stars out, blur it, put the stars back in. It's only a couple of mouse clicks. It only takes seconds. So it's much better than having blurred stars when you're done. Now, something Bob just mentioned, you see this color mode down here. The way this works, it, in this case, will remove a star if the star is in all 3 color channels, red, green, and blue. However, sometimes that doesn't work well. It leaves a lot of stars behind. And the reason is I could have a very red star that has no blue. It could even be a big star in the image, but since it's so red and very little blue, if I select this function where it has to be in all 3 color channels, it would not remove it. That's what this mode is for. This removes stars that are either in any color channel, any single color channel. So if the star is in either the red, green, or blue, it could be in all 3, but it only has to be in one of them. It will then remove it. The problem with that is it can remove a lot of things that aren't stars. So to give you an idea, we'll go back to our original image here. Just have to apply. So here is the image where we have removed stars, but you will notice it's missing a few. So if I zoom in here and move to there, see all these little tiny stars here? Normally I would use the remove small stars function to get rid of those. But the thing is, they're only in 1 color channel, maybe 2, but not all 3. So if I click this, you notice it got rid of most of the stars, but it selected a lot of stuff here that isn't stars. I could then go in and use the select special processing. Excuse me. Click here, and then I can enlarge that circle. And reposition it slightly. Make the circle a little bigger. There we go. And then I can say include, and now it will keep all of the data inside that circle. And I can put multiple circles on the image of different sizes. So I can say, just keep this star, for example. And now you'll see it's got all the stars in here. And it took a lot more of the small stars outside out. That's what that allows you to do. The problem is it will take out things that are not stars, which is what Bob said tripped him up when he first started using it. Okay, so I'll make that go away and we'll click that and go back to the image we had. There we go. And then I just click enable and fill in that data. So here we have our starless image, or just about starless image. Now, to give you an idea of why you might want to do that, now I can blur just this background area, right? There are no stars out here that I will take out by using massive blurs on my image to reduce the noise. So for example, first thing we're going to do, we're going to make a mask. It'll be a Luminance Mask. Now, the nebula right now is so close to the background that it's going to be difficult using a simple mask like this to just affect all of this area and not get any of this. The way around that is to paint on the mask. So we'll haul up the paint tools. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint white over this area. You'll see why in just a second. White happens to be 65,536 in 16-bit color space. There we go. I'll make that a little bigger so I don't have to paint too much. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in and just look at the nebula. And all I'm doing now is I'm painting on a mask. And all I'm going to do is grab the nebula and I'm going to make it pretty much white. And then fill in this. There we go. And then I'm going to blur it because I remember, just like the last time we looked, we don't want a sharp edge because that'll make a mess in our image. Actually, I'll leave the sharp edge and blur it when I'm done so you can see the effect. So now what we're going to do, remember that threshold tool? Here's where you use it. What I want to do is I want to make all of this stuff out here black while leaving the white alone. Here's all of the other stuff in the image. Here's the white. All I have to do is put this slider in between the two, and now everything else other than the area I painted is black, as you can see. Then I'm going to invert it. Just take the negative. Now, by using this mask, I'm protecting the detail in the nebula and really letting me blur the heck out of the background. But there's a very sharp transition, and I'm going to leave that in for a minute so you can see the effect. I'll just take the default name for now. I'll hate myself for that in a minute. Okay, now we're going to go to this image, and we're going to apply a really excessive blur to take out all of this streaky background. I might even have to do it in 2 iterations. There we go. So now we have a very blurred image where the background is very blurry, but not noisy. Now we're going to apply that mask to it. And you'll see what I mean about the sharp transition because of the way I painted that mask when we zoom back in and have a look. So here you have a nice clean, although slightly green background because I haven't fixed it yet. Okay, now can you see the effect of the very sharp edge on our noise reduction mask? Can everyone see the sort of noisy edge there?
There, but
See if I can blow it up a little more. It's very obvious on my screen, but zoom compression tends to take some of it out. There, can you see it now? You see all sorts of noise here that doesn't exist out here?
Yes.
Okay. So now what we're going to do, we're going to blur that mask a little bit. And we can use any of the blurring functions. I'll just use a Gaussian blur here. Oops, I opened an additional dialog here that I didn't want. I have to replace my trackball. The button is bouncing, which is really annoying when you're doing image processing, let me tell you. And we'll use a fairly large radius blur maybe even larger than that. That's not too bad. So now we've softened the edge substantially on the mask. We'll save it again. I may want to do another iteration of that, so that's why I'm checking here. So now we'll come here and we'll reapply this with the blurred mask. And now you notice that it's less abrupt, but still a little bit. So we blur it maybe one more iteration here. I have to lock that adjustment. Oh, that's something I should mention in Images Plus. Because the tool, the blur tool, has never been closed, it's still open here. Oops, wrong one, sorry. Don't need the feature mask tool anymore. I need my blur tool. Okay, we'll pull it up from the history. Here we are. So if I were to change this slider now, or change this, it doesn't add another blur. It's merely modifying the blur that I had already placed on the image. If I want to add another blur, I have to lock the last adjustment. That's what this button does. Set view using image currently displayed. I click that. That now locks this adjustment that I've made to the image. So when I do it again, it adds another blur. And I'm going to do about 3 of them. So now I've really blurred the edge, as you can see. And we'll save that mask again. We'll come back to here, go to the mask surface dialog and click apply. And we should now it's reasonably smooth transition from noiseless background to the nebula. Everyone see the difference between what it was and what it is now? Just by blurring that mask.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've blurred the background. Oops. Probably want to noise reduce the nebula just a little bit. There's a variety of ways of doing that. I'm simply going to use the selected neighborhood detail preserving smooth, probably with maybe about 7 for a, there we go. So now we have a noise reduced nebula as well. That was applied without a mask, so it blurred everything, including the nebula. It took the noise down substantially. We might want to make that maybe just a little bit less. Yeah, that's okay. There we go. So now we have an image that is reasonably well noise reduced. It's got the nebula in there. The one thing it does not have yet is the nebula doesn't have much red. You notice it's kind of green. So we're going to try something here. I'm going to use the, better do one more thing. I'm going to duplicate this image. The reason I'm going to do that is some mask tools. Oops, view duplicate. There we go. The color luminance mask tool actually operates on the image. It doesn't make a copy of it, so you end up destroying your image, so you just make a copy. Unfortunately, there's no documentation to tell you that. You will find out the first time you do it when your image disappears. Like most astrophotography packages, there's actually a ton of documentation on and how-tos on the Images Plus website that I showed at the beginning in that presentation. But there is no real good description of when something like that happens. You really just have to get used to the tool. So now what we're going to do, we're going to use the custom luminance mask. We could use color too. I could use custom luminance color. It might even work better. So let's do that. There we go. And I'm going to select this color. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the dim stuff. Oop, a little too much. How's that looking generally? Okay, got a little too much here, so we have to take that down a bit. And then just feather it a little bit. Too much. Okay, so now we have a mask that has just that sort of upper area of the nebula selected. I'm going to save that. Oh, I have to make it a mask. It's still an RGB image, as you see. Images Plus will tell you when things like that happen. And we'll save that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our image right here. Zoom in so we can see the effect. And what we're going to do, we're going to make all this area a little more red. So we'll say color balance. There's a variety of different color adjustment tools that we can use here. I'm going to use this one. And we'll just make it a little redder. That's getting better. And we'll use the mask to make sure that it's only applied to the areas that we have selected. And then we can dial the red up a bit. There we go. So now you're getting the red tendrils back in, and you still got some of the blue-green that's in the middle there. All a function of the fact that we're using a mask for that adjustment. One second here. I want to check something. I guess I should have used a different color tool. That one subtracted the green at the same time it increased the red. 1 second, we'll get rid of that. By the way, the history dialog, you can go back and remove anything anywhere and then reapply everything. It's quite convenient. We'll use additive color balance so that we don't subtract any color off.
Excuse me, Blair, can you remove a single line in that history?
Yes, I can go back and click on the filter here and remove just the filter and then reapply all of the following adjustments.
That's neat, great.
Yeah, and it's got supposedly an infinite depth. Now, there's a cautionary note here. The way it stores all of these adjustments, for each one of these, there's an image stored on your disk. So when you go back and double click on this, it goes back to that image. What that means is as this gets longer and longer and longer, processing your image takes more and more space on your disk drive. But it does allow quick history popping back and forth. When you close the image, all of those intermediate images are deleted from your drive. So you don't have to go and delete them all. But the history dialog does keep them. So you can see what's happened here. I'm dialing the red up throughout the image. Now we're going to apply that mask again. Paste. And so you can see we've increased the red in a lot of the tendrils. You can take a look here. If we take that out, you notice that I've got less red in here. The problem is, of course, that with the mask I used, it didn't limit just to the tendrils. So I'm by adjusting the red, I'm reducing the green, which is losing me a lot of the nebula. So although that adjustment can be made to work if we tinker enough, we're not quite at the point yet where we should do that. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to get the red back a slightly different way here. Okay, we've looked at the feature mask and what it does. It splits the stars right here out of an image. You can put them back together. And like any image processing package, Images Plus provides full support for layers. These are two images, two layers, if you will, and there's two functions: combine all open images and combine and manual combine, where you get to select what images you combine. Since we only have two images open and we want to combine them both, we'll use this one. And we select blend modes, opacities, and masks. And we let it crunch. And so now I have the bottom image, which is, by the way, if you click the, let me pull this dialog up. If you click this button, image, whatever image you have highlighted here will show up. So here we are. This is the star image. This is the nebula image right here. And we're combining the two images. Images Plus automatically selected the merge split blend mode. It's what you want to use when you're combining these. And the advantage to using merge split, and it's a unique blend mode to Images Plus, is it actually supports negative pixels. When you separate the stars out, it is entirely possible that the mathematical operation has produced negative pixels. You can't display those. So what Images Plus does is it adds an offset to the image so you can display it properly. But when you go and recombine it, those negative pixels go away when you add this in, and it automatically takes that bias off the image for the combination. Quite a handy combine mode. It's not a combine mode you'll find in any other package that I know of out there. It fully supports negative pixel values. So I can click apply and I get my combination image. So here we have the noise reduced background. We have all the stars back in the image. If you take a look, there are no artifacts around the stars. None of the stars have blurred because they weren't there in the image when we blurred the background. And you notice how nice and smooth the background is compared to what we started with. And I'll pull up what we started with here in just a minute. So here's what we have now. I'm going to just close the star image. We don't need it anymore. And Jerry, you asked if I could go back. I can go all the way back, for example, to the read. And here's what we started with. So if you take a look, so you can see night and day difference already, right? We've got a nice smooth background here. We don't have any of this streaky noise, but we still have all the stars. I'm just going to tuck this image aside here because we'll come back to it as a reference in a minute. So now we want to get some red in this image, and just like a lot of packages, Images Plus provides a bunch of color balance and correction tools. This particular tool called Color Balance lets me set the white balance, the midtone balance, and the background balance. So ideally, what I would do is I would find a star in here that was white. I'd have to go to a variety of tables, look up the star that's white, click on it, and set the white balance on that star. I'm going to just assume this particular star is white. We click on it. Now those stars are whitish, but I've got all the red back in the nebula now. So I've corrected the color. The one thing is I've shifted the color slightly in the background. So I'm just going to neutralize the background color. And there we go. Now we have a nice, smooth gray background. Oops. Pull that up a bit. And I have a nebula that's got all the red back in it, as you can see. And the only thing we really have left to do to this image right now is we want to basically up the contrast a bit. There's a variety of ways of doing that, and I'm pretty sure you've guessed that they involve masks. For instance, one of the things we'll do, let's take a look at the histogram first. What are we doing on time? No, just about right on time. So here we have the histogram of the image. This is the sky background. These lumps back here are due to the noise reduction that we applied. Because I used a frequency-based filter, one of the things it does is it leaves a dark edge around the image. Let me see if I can zoom in enough so you can see it. Okay, can everyone see the very thin blackish line at the top? Might be very, very hard to see. Might be a little more visible at the bottom. Let's see. Very hard to see. I'm just going to crop it out anyway. I know it's, now you can see it. Can you see the black sort of line around the whole image?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all of this, and it's an artifact of the noise reduction processing that we did. Normally this histogram would come up and just come right down. So we're just going to crop that out just so you can see the effect here. And I'll just take crop, oops, that sticky mouse button again. I'll use the touchpad on my laptop and we'll crop out that edge. And now when we look at the histogram, it looks exactly what it should look like because I've cropped out all of those artifacts. So what we want to do now, we want to check a couple of things. Luminance looks good, but I want to make sure that all of the color channels look good. And they do. So nothing's clipped at the low end. What that means is I'm now free to use levels to set the black point. Somewhere around there. And we can turn up the midtones. And because we've greatly noise reduced the image, I can turn the midtones up a lot, as you can see. Actually, this image is good enough that I can do it with just a with a curve. Okay, I'm going to make a luminance mask out of that. We'll save the luminance mask. And then we'll simply apply it to the brightening that I was doing. And now we have a nebula that is beginning to brighten. If you take a look, you can see that there's no curve. There is some curve, and we're starting to brighten up the nebula. And we can do a couple of iterations of that and make that effectively as bright as we want. For instance, we can even use something as simple as that sticky mouse button again, sorry. Brightness and contrast. Normally, you would never use brightness and contrast because it affects everything in the image. But with the use of that mask, we can limit where it's applied. Oops. What's it saying there? Oh, I see what I did. Sorry. I closed the image I was working on with my sticky mouse button. So we're back to the original one that we had before I cropped it. So it's got the color. Okay, it'll do. We'll make a mask out of this. 1 sec. I just have to undo the brightness and contrast adjustment a minute. Okay, we'll make a mask. This mask. And we'll stretch the mask a bit to brighten it up. We can get a little aggressive here on the stretch of the mask. It doesn't matter. And then we'll just take the midtones up a bit. And then finally darken it one little bit more here. All I'm trying to do is get the mask so that the background is reasonably dark. There we go. And then we'll just save it. And then we'll go back to that brightness and contrast adjustment. And we'll brighten up the image, dial up the contrast, brighten the image up a little more, and then apply the mask. And now we have an image where the nebula is starting to pop right out. Right, so if you take a look, there it is without that brightness and contrast and without the mask on it. Here it is with. So now the nebula is starting to pop out quite a bit. And you can do a couple of iterations of that to get that nebula as bright as you want. The mask will keep the background under control. Right, and then finally, you would just simply set the levels about there. Now we're getting close to the final image. A little bit more brightening and you'd have what you want. We've put color in using a mask. We've stretched the image using the mask. We've taken all the streaky noise out of the background by using the feature mask to separate out the stars so we don't lose the stars to the blur, and then protect the nebula with a mask, and you get a pretty decent little image. And if we just sort of do one final contrast enhancement here, it's a little too much, I guess. If we make sure that we only apply that to the background. Ooh, a little too much. Oops. A little bit more, and then I think we're there. That's sort of posterizing. I'm not quite sure I like that. Can you see the noise that it brought up in this area? So we'll undo that. And we'll just use a different adjustment to fix that. Good old curves. That's not too bad. And then finally, a quick levels adjustment to set the black point. That's not bad. So here we have M1 processed using masks. Here we have the original M1. I put them both at the same scale. I think you can see the difference. Right, so this had a green, streaky, noisy background, all fixed up. It had stars that were the wrong color, now reasonably fixed up. That assumes I clicked on a white star. We didn't go look it up, but it seemed to make the nebula the right color. And we got all the red back in the nebula. Right, we can even, if you want, reduce the stars. And Images Plus has one of the best star reduction tools out there. Most times you don't even need a mask. You can see the stars got smaller, right? Here we'll, I have yet to find a package that's got as nice a star reduction tool as Images Plus. Take a look at these stars in this area. See how all of them got smaller? It's subtle, but the net effect is quite nice when you're looking at an image. Here it is without the star reduction. Here it is with the star reduction. And the bigger stars got smaller. the smaller stars got smaller as well. And unfortunately, when you do that, of course, it distorts the nebula a little bit. So by now you get the idea of masks to the rescue. What we'll do is we'll make a star mask. And the way you do that, you go back to the feature mask tool. Let me just, no, I want to leave this one there a minute. I'm just going to duplicate this image again, just so I don't accidentally lose it. There we go. And what we're going to do this time, we're going to use that same feature mask tool. I think I already opened it. Nope. And we'll just pick the defaults. That'll probably get most of the stars of interest. Okay, so you see most of the stars have gone away, but we're not interested in filling the area back in just yet. All I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make the selection a little bigger. And I'm going to prevent taking any stars in the nebula itself, just because I don't want to lose any detail inside the nebula. So we'll put that there, dial that up to cover the whole nebula again. Once this gets over here far enough, you can click and drag on the image as well. And I'll select include. There. Now what I'm going to do, rather than fill all the stars in, I'm just going to make a star image. Now we'll make a mask out of this image, and now we have a star mask with just a couple of quick button clicks. We now have a star mask, and what we'll do, we will use a thresholding operation to make the stars nice and, or the star mask nice and bright, and we'll enlarge the stars in the image. There's a function which is in most packages called erosion and dilation. We're going to take dilation and we can make the stars a little bigger. I'll make them 3 pixels bigger. There we go. Now we'll make a mask out of this, a luminance mask, and we'll save it. Of course, it's now 5 images in there hiding what I want. And we'll save this star mask. Now we can apply that star mask to the reduction that we did here, to the star reduction, and it'll only reduce the stars. It won't distort anything in the nebula. So if we zoom in here, since the star reduction tool is actually pretty good, it probably didn't do much damage to the nebula anyway. But if you take a look with and without the nebula, the stars should look the same, which they do. And if we zoomed right in, you'd see that there's a very slight improvement in the nebula. But the nice part is now I can really crank up the star reduction. So here we are without a reduction. Here we are with a reduction. And the star mask protects the nebula while I do that. So you can see I've got nice, tiny, tight stars now, as opposed to slightly more bloated stars. And you can blend that effect with the opacity slider on the history dialog, should you want to. There you go. And there's no distortion around any of the stars. And I think we've covered virtually all of the mask tools. The one tool that we only touched on is the feature mask tool. It is probably one of the more powerful tools in Images Plus in combination with other functions. So you can work on just the background without hurting the stars. You can work on just the stars. So for instance, suppose I wanted to watch. Normally, if you would take this and increase the saturation to get really colorful stars, it kind of makes a mess out of the nebula, you notice? I'm getting nice red, blue stars, but look at what it did to the nebula. The way to avoid that, of course, is to not apply it to the nebula, just apply it to the stars. So what you do, you use the feature mask tool. And again, because it's so quick, you can just pop the stars out of the image. Again, you'd probably want to protect a lot of the area there. We'll just use, oops. My bouncy mouse button. I have to use my touchpad, bear with me. All right, that's pretty good. So now what we'll do is we'll enlarge the selected area a little bit. So now we have that. We'll usually fill that in like so and split the stars out of the image. There are the stars. Now I can jack up the saturation on the stars without affecting the nebula at all. You can get ridiculous doing this. So you can see now we have really red stars, probably way too red, but I'm trying to show an example here. And all I've done, now I'm going to combine these two images again. It's actually going to try and combine three because I have the original image tucked down here in the corner. You can hit escape just to stop it, and then you go in and remove the, I think that's the, yeah, that's the one that hasn't been had anything done with it. We'll remove that image. Got the stars here. It's set to merge split just as it should be. We'll let it do its thing. And now we have nice colorful stars, as you can see, but we haven't distorted the nebula. We haven't oversaturated the nebula there at all. All right, so I really, for anyone that's using Images Plus, I really suggest getting used to using the feature mask tool. It is a very powerful way of isolating what you're doing in the image. For instance, someone asked about galaxies earlier. A lot of the time, you want to really work at brightening up the spiral arms, but there's a lot of stars, foreground stars in the spiral arms. And when you brighten them up, you bloat those stars. Use the feature mask tool, haul the stars out, then you can do all sorts of things to the galaxy and put the stars back in when you're done. By doing that, you get a nice clean galaxy with all the sharpening and brightening that you want, and the stars still look normal. So it makes it very easy to sort of concentrate on one local aspect of the image, whether it's the nebula, the background, or the stars. And the feature mask tool makes all that possible. You can even make starless masks for brightening. You know, I can go to this image, which has no stars in it, make a mask out of it and use it to brighten the image and not bloat the stars. There's all sorts of things you can do. And the star mask was a my bouncy mouse. The star mask was a major improvement in Images Plus, I think at the beginning of version 6. And I would encourage anybody that has Images Plus and uses it to really learn to use the star mask. It makes processing so much easier. I think that's pretty much all of the masking functions. I think we hit them all. Oh, the only one we didn't hit is a high pass filter, and I'm going to ignore that one for tonight because it's not a mask. It's really a sharpening tool. I have no idea why Mike stuck it in there. It basically can be used to sharpen up an image quite effectively too. Any questions? That either means everyone understood everything or there's a fog.
Glad there's a recording.
Fair enough. The recording will be on the RASC Halifax Center website. Am I correct on that, Jerry?
Yeah, eventually. Give me a day or two.
Yeah, and I will put the slides up on my website. Let me just check. Bear with me a minute. Just want to check on the address. I have all of the slides from the presentations that I've done up there. Just to find out where I put them. No, I'll have to dig it up. I have a hidden directory. What's
Still
that?
got PowerPoint open? Have you still got PowerPoint open?
I do, but the slides that I was interested in, bear with me here. The slides that I was interested in, I have a directory on my website called RASC, but it's not public, it's hidden. I will post the address to the announce list. I'll get Judy to post it, and you folks can download the slides. If anyone is attending that isn't from the Halifax Center, just drop me a line and I can send the slide deck if you would like it. Any questions?
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not about mask or anything. It's about, because at the beginning of this, when you're talking about doing 20-minute subs instead of 15-minute subs, are you
Yep.
talking about per sub?
Sorry?
That you're saying per sub?
Yeah, when you are using a light pollution filter, which is what Bob used on this image, it reduces a lot of the light in the image and it dims everything quite a bit. So in order to get a reasonably quiet background, you need enough signal from the sky, and most of that is removed by the filter. So in order to get a decent sky background, you have to greatly lengthen your sub exposures. I personally use 15 minutes at f5, or sorry, f7.
You guys, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you guys don't have many discards? Like, is there not a high risk of satellites going through them 15, 20 minutes?
My comment about satellites is who cares? That's what various combined modes are for. If you use Images Plus, there are 2 or 3 combined modes that will basically completely remove satellites. When you combine, Deep Sky Stacker has 2 of them. Basically, the one I normally use is a min-max excluded average. So what it does is it looks at your entire image set and it calculates the minimum and maximum for every pixel and throws those out and does not average them. And then it averages all of the rest. What that will do is if I've got a satellite trail that's going through the image right here, that will obviously be the maximum and it'll throw that away. It won't throw the image away, it'll just throw those pixels away. If you are using Deep Sky Stacker, they have a mode called, I think it's called Kappa Sigma stacking. What basically it does is it looks at, you can set how many standard deviations away from the mean you will keep. So if you set it to something like 1 or 1.5, then anything outside that will be thrown away and it will remove satellite trails and all that sort of stuff. Images Plus also has that. They call it, just one sec till I pull it up here.
I'm thinking all this time you had to discard them subs and not use them.
Nope, not at all.
I'm just throwing away time then.
Yep, no, I don't discard those at all. I let them average in. Let me see here. What's it called? I got to open a light frame. Bear with me. I think Bob has a few light frames in here somewhere. No, I've taken them out. Okay, we'll just grab.
Oh, back at the beginning, I thought I saw some.
Possibly. All I'm doing, I just wanted to get the ability to open the process. Here we go. So you can see here are the combination modes you can use in the stacker with Images Plus. You can average, you can do a median, you can look at just the minimum, the maximum, the Sigma clipped average. That will let you set a standard deviation and anything outside that would be thrown away. You can set a Sigma clipped median. And the one I typically use is min-max excluded average. I only use Sigma clipped average when min-max doesn't take it out. And I think I've been doing this for 20 years and using Images Plus for at least 10. And I think maybe twice I've had to use Sigma clipped average. Min-max works for virtually everything. and it uses, basically all of the data. So you even though you use longer subs, you don't throw away too much data at all.
So could you use more subs instead of longer ones?
You could, but the issue is the sky background is so dark that you're actually into the camera noise. What that means is you have to use many, many, many more subs. So let's say you were taking 5-minute subs, which would be typical for me without a filter. If I would normally get a decent sky background in, let's say, 2 hours of 5-minute subs, it might take me 20 hours of 5-minute subs if I put a filter in.
Okay.
It's that kind of difference. Whereas if I use 15-minute subs, it might just take me 3 hours.
Right. Okay.
Just has to do with the way noise adds, and it adds as the square root of the sum of the squares. Any other questions? One comment, some people were mentioning that they were having some issues with Deep Sky Stacker dumping images to Images Plus. You can work around that. All you have to do is save it in the right format, but I would heavily suggest simply using the stacking system built in Images Plus. It's entirely automated. Basically what you end up doing, you open this dialog, which you get from the image set operations, the automatic DSLR one-shot color or CCD stacking system. You open up your light frames, your dark frames, your flat frames, your either flat darks or bias frames. Then you come over, you set what camera type you're using and what your, if you're using a DSLR, not all DSLRs are supported. Mike used a library called LibRaw, I believe. And since he hasn't supported the software for about a year now, you will only see cameras up to like about a year or two ago for DSLRs that are supported generically within the software. When you get to one-shot color CCDs or CMOS cameras, there's a whole variety of debayer matrices that you can pick. You can see there's lots of cameras, Kodak, Nikons, Canons. Most of them are in there. If you notice, you won't find Zoo because, Zoo cameras weren't around when Mike stopped the development of the software. So you just use the generic RGGB debayering, and that's exactly what a Zoo camera uses. From there, you click the light frame processing, select what you want for your image processing. You can either subtract darks or you can do it without dark subtraction. If you do it without dark subtraction, what it does, it builds a hot pixel map from your dark frame, but it does not subtract the dark. It just uses the hot pixel map to remove the hot pixels. That may sound dumb to a lot of people, but cameras since about 2008, most high-end cameras, DSLRs included, have built-in dark suppression. You actually don't want to subtract a dark frame. If you do, you add noise to your image. Anything you do to an image, whether you add or subtract, you can't subtract noise, you add noise. So by clicking without dark subtract and just use the darks as a hot pixel map, then you don't add that noise into your final image. If your camera has on-chip dark suppression. If it does not, you got to subtract the darks. You can reduce green noise automatically, the usual stuff. You can normalize all your images. I generally normalize them to the average. That makes flat fielding a little easier. You can grade your images. You can select the maximum eccentricity to allow when your stars are trailed a bit. You can use the best percentage of the set, or you can select auto. The auto star alignment has two alignment functions. The normal one, you just leave quick alignment unchecked, and it will take care of distortions at the edges of the frames. What it does is it matches stars across the whole frame. Unlike Deep Sky Stacker, which only matches, it needs a minimum of 8. Basically, Images Plus will use all the stars it can find, and it will distort images so that all the stars line up. That's useful when you have a large dither in your images, and it's the default stacking method that I use. If you have optics that don't have any distortion, and I'm fortunate that I do, I have a nice, reasonably high-end refractor, you can click quick align. When you do that, you have to tell it whether or not a meridian flip is included. By the way, the default stacking method will work even with meridian flips. You don't have to worry about it. You have to tell it if you have a mirror in there and a few other things here. And then it will stack your images quicker than the default method. Finally, you specify a combination method and the name of your output file. Click Save. Then come here and select which of the processes you want to do. Do you want to normalize it, align them, and combine them is what I normally do. Click Process, go get a cup of coffee, depending on how many images, maybe eat lunch. I've had one where I had to start it in the morning and started in the evening rather, when I finished collecting data at about 4 a.m. at the cottage, and I had something like 400 subs. I went to bed after I clicked the button, and when I got up, I had my stacked image. But at any rate, it's got this built-in stacking system that works very well. It works better than Deep Sky Stacker on most images. In the auto stacking, in the sort of normal method that takes care of distortions, it's one of the reasons I moved to using Images Plus for stacking, is it got rid of distortions with my reflector. I was doing mosaics, and distortions at the edge of the field were a killer, and it took them out. Any other questions?
There's always questions, but
That's all right.
since I've been through this not very long ago, thank you very much, Blair. And it was really good to walk through it again, because a lot of stuff I missed the first time. I started stacking the second set. I had 2 sets of images.
All right.
And I'm partway through that. And it turns out that they aren't as bad as I thought they were. There's actually a fair bit of detail there. So that's
Excellent.
good. Eventually, I'll get enough data there that it'll make a reasonable picture.
Yeah.
But I'm doing 15-minute subs now.
Yeah. 15-minute subs will work out quite a bit better for you. It'll get rid of most of the streaky noise. Please make sure that you do dither your images. But the combination of dithering and 15-minute subs should make most of that noise go away.
The other thing you found when you were processing them was there was a bias of the color distribution, and you suggested putting an extension on the dew shield.
Oh, that wasn't a bias in the color. That was a light pollution gradient.
Yeah, well, and it ended up screwing up the picture. It took a while to get rid of it. So
Yeah.
I have tried that tonight. I will know better when I see the images.
We'll see how it turns out. Obviously, you have to rotate that light pollution shield to block your source of light pollution.
Yeah, it's pretty general when you're shooting across the harbor.
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry, go ahead there.
Sorry, if you choose a cylindrical extension, you don't have to rotate it.
Cylindrical extension simply does not work. What happens with a cylindrical extension is no matter which way you put it, there's a little bit of light that gets in and hits the far wall. That then bounces around and makes it into your optics. If you just make a shield that is 120 to 180 degrees, then there's nothing on the other side for the light to bounce off.
Right.
Yeah, I found that out. I found that out the hard way. I used to use a complete foam dew shield on my scope.
Yep.
and I was still getting light pollution gradients, and I couldn't figure out why. And it's because I'm using long subs. The light bounces around inside and still enough of it gets in to cause a gradient. Whereas if you use a light shield, which only covers at most 180 degrees of the aperture, I can shoot almost right into the street light across the street with no problem.
If you've got a fixed point of light, it probably is considerably better. But when you're looking into something like just the smear of light from the harbor.
If you're looking into the smear of light from the harbor, that's not what a light shield is designed to take out. It's designed to take out light coming from one direction. So if, for example, you were pointed perpendicular to the light smear across the harbor, it will take that out for you.
That would make sense. Okay. So what I'm actually shooting now, the reason I was late was because I was trying to get alignment finished and then get in here for the lecture. I'm looking at the images beside me as they're coming in, and I certainly have some gradients there.
Yeah,
because I used a cylindrical one as well.
If you're looking right into the light pollution, it won't help.
No. So it's process it out at the other end, right?
Exactly. Yeah, a light shield or a dew shield for that matter really helps with off-axis light, not on-axis.
Yeah. I kind of thought that when I was building it, and then I thought, no, there's something wrong with it, because it didn't make sense when I put it on as I'm just extending the problem.
Yeah, but what happens is if the light is off-axis, there's nothing on. So it puts the entire aperture in the shadow of the light shield, and there's nothing on the other side for it to reflect off of.
I now can understand. Unfortunately, unlike you, I don't have a single source of light pollution. It's so generalized that I'm going to have to process it out.
That's exactly right. I have lots of light pollution, but I have a very bright light polluter right across the street.
You have a biggie.
Yeah.
Even if you had like a black felt on the inside, would that absorb anything? Or
the darker you make it, the better. But you have to remember, if you're shooting a 15-minute sub, you have a long time for a little bit of light to integrate.
To get in. Yeah. Yep. I'm looking at the image, and it's kind of white, right straight down through the middle, and the rest of it is dark. So obviously, there's constant light leaking in.
Yeah.
So that was an experiment that will die on immediately after this session.
Yeah, there's not much you can do if you're pointed right into the light pollution.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to try. Sorry, I think I'm going to try purchasing some of that super black paint and see if that helps.
To tell you the truth, Jerry, what helped the most when I was using a dew shield, my dew shield was a Clint Shannon design, if you've ever heard people talking about Clint. I used some camp foam, and on the inside of the camp foam, I sewed and glued black felt. And that was about the best in terms of a dew shield. It cut out as much reflection as I could possibly cut out, because of course the felt is not smooth at all. And it also kept the dew away quite nicely.
Right.
I sandpapered some very dark black paper and stuck it in. It made it rough. It doesn't reflect as much as the previous paint job.
Yeah, you would be surprised at how well felt works. The problem, of course, is felt is not stiff. So you have to glue it on something, whether it's cardboard, construction paper, or, as I said, the blue camp foam that I used worked out really well.
Well, I have to go. Thank you very much. I think it's gonna make my processing much easier, I believe.
You would be surprised how well a decent astro processing package will speed things up for you.
Okay, well, thank you very much again.
No problem.
And I will look for your next presentation.
No problem.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah, good night. Any other
Gotta
questions?
run out.
folks?
No,
Thanks,
I gotta
Blair.
go find a new
Good luck.
target.
Thank you very much.
Good enough.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll talk
Thank
to
you,
you later.
Thanks, Blair.
Night, everyone.
I'll show you the results when I get them.
Please do.
Okay, thanks, Blair.
Yeah, talk to you later.